Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with the latest episode of the Code Reds podcast on the CLNS Media Network. My pleasure to welcome back for the second time in the last couple of months, Mark Sheldon of MLB.com, covering the Cincinnati Reds, of course, for Reds.com. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Mike. It's been a long time. Just kidding.
It's been a couple of weeks, not too bad. By the way, I want to thank you for allowing me the privilege of filling in for you over the weekend for the Tigers series. Now, I had nothing to do with the Reds getting swept out of town or swept in their own ballpark. I want that out there for the public record. But I want to thank you for allowing me to fill in. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you for doing it, as always. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you always learn something when you're on the beat like you are on a daily basis. The vibe of the team. And over the weekend, it just seemed, and it was surprisingly so, that it was a little bit flat, especially considering what happened in New York, a huge 3-game series sweep of the powerful Yankees at Yankee Stadium. Were you surprised by what happened over the weekend with the Tigers?
Honestly, I wasn't, only because although I will say we qualify this. I was partially surprised. And the reason why I wasn't surprised was, as you know, this season, they've won some big series against the big teams. The Dodgers, they swept the Dodgers. They won a season series over the Phillies. That comes to mind right now. And they kind of went backwards after those games, or after those hot moments. They had a 7-game winning streak. And at one point, they beat the Cubs and the Rockies, I believe. And then they still went backwards. So this whole season's been kind of a 1-step up, 2-step back kind of thing. However, I really thought in some way that after the Yankee series, even though the Yankees are struggling, they're one of the worst teams in baseball right now in the last month or so. However, the Reds played a complete series in every which way but they could think of. They had some effective starting pitching, excellent bullpen work, and of course the offense was they never trailed. They led every game from start to finish. So the vibe that I felt in the Bronx, in the clubhouse, just watching the games, say, well, they know what's at stake. They know that the trade deadline's coming. They know that they're running out of time in general. Now that the season's half over, this may be the time they have to turn it on. And maybe this is, again, I think Fernando Cruz said it. They had that nice big statement series sweep of the Astros last year, and that kind of sent them on their way to a really strong summer. I thought that might be the Yankee series as well, and it wasn't.
I will tell you that during that Yankee series, the one play that stood out, and I think I told you this in the press box as well, was the double play that the Reds turned. Speaking of Fernando Cruz, Cruz was on the mound in the 7th inning of the middle game of that series, and they needed, and Aaron Judge was at the plate. 1st and 3rd, 1 out. Yankees were on the verge of at least tying the game, if not going ahead with Judge at the plate. They get a 5-4-3 double play. And I thought to myself, if they can do that, if they can capitalize on that, get that big moment against against one of the best bats in baseball, maybe they are onto something. Maybe they can build off of that. That's what I thought.
Well, it was a gutsy move. I mean, they had certainly no one would have faulted them, even though that would have put maybe the go-ahead run on second base, because it was, like you said, 1st and 3rd. They had a base open. If they didn't want to get burned by Judge, they could have went. I think LeMahieu was on deck, but they went after Judge, and it seemed like there was a whole lot of hesitation about it. And they trusted Cruz. He's been so big in those tough situations, those inherited runners, those big moments. He's done it all year. He's been not as good as starting a clean inning, but when you have the pressure on, he just seems to thrive under that. So it was a big statement that the Reds went after the biggest, baddest dude in the league right now, and they beat him, and they beat the Yankees. And even when the Yankees are struggling, they're still one of the baseball's winning teams and this season, and they're a team, the kind of teams that the Reds will be seeing in October, if they can get to October, which remains far from assured at this point.
We speak of Fernando Cruz. He had a rare bump in the road over the weekend. The Reds could not hold the lead on Saturday. The 2-0 lead that Hunter Greene pitched, and we'll get to Hunter Greene in just a moment and his big news from Tuesday afternoon. But they could not hold the 2-0 lead. Fernando Cruz gives up the lead, and a 2-0 lead turned into 5-2 almost immediately. And it was really a deflating loss. The reason I bring Fernando Cruz up is in his last two appearances, he's really been, I think, and I want to get your opinion, Mark, he's been back on track. And that to me is a sign of a guy who's very resilient. He is an older player. We forget that a little bit. I mean, I guess he's 30. Help me out here. 33,
almost
34.
Yeah.
Yes, he's 34. But the fact that he was able to bounce back against the Colorado Rockies twice. Actually, he pitched on Sunday against the Tigers, and then he pitched again on Tuesday night against the Colorado Rockies, getting out of kind of a tricky situation. That a sign to you that Fernando Cruz really has some intestinal fortitude?
Well, he's shown it all season. Again, for some reason, I think he thrives on the pressure. I think when he gave up the lead against Detroit over the weekend, he had a clean inning. I don't think he came in with anybody on base, and that's been, for whatever reason, his struggles. It happened to him in Los Angeles. That was maybe the worst of it, and he bounced back from that. And honestly, for a little while, you could have made a fringe case that he belonged in the All-Star game for a little while, and then here he is. But yes, like you said, he's a guy that's been through a lot. He toiled for 11 years in winter ball, minor leagues, independent ball, foreign baseball, all of it, and finally got his chance as a 32-year-old rookie a couple of years ago. So I don't think there's a whole lot of things that will get in his way, and I think that it certainly informs how he handles situations. And you see a guy like not a normal, year 3 and under player, because he, like you said, he's older. He's been through it. He's not a typical young player. So I'm not surprised that he could bounce back. And I think that's just part of his deal. He's got the split. I think it's a split finger fastball. That's kind of his bread and butter. He likes to bury it in the dirt and get guys to chase. Now the trouble he runs into is if it's not great feel, or he doesn't have quite the thing, or the hitters are just not going to swing at it, then he's got to rely on a secondary pitch for him, and maybe that's where he gets hurt.
All right, let's move on to the All-Stars. First things first, Elly de la Cruz earning his first All-Star selection on Sunday when the announcements were made at 5:30 in the afternoon after the Reds were swept by the Tigers. Reds get a little bit of a boost anyway with Elly making that team. They will be playing, of course, July 16th in Texas. And David Bell said something interesting on Monday. He called Monday's game in which Elly stole second, stole third, and almost stole home in the first inning. He wound up scoring a couple of times. He did so many things so well in that Monday night win over Colorado 6-0. It was the energy he brought in the first inning, and that was what the Reds needed. And really, to me, it's emblematic of what the Reds can be when Elly provides the energy in the middle of the season.
Yeah, without a doubt. You basically said it. It's when he goes and he's hitting well and he's certainly running well, this team can do a lot of things. He's a run creator. He's not just a run producer. He's a run creator. He can certainly use his legs and steal bases, but he can also be aggressive, and he's one of the best at taking an extra base. There's very few guys that can get to second base on little dinky hits like he can, and he's certainly able to break off a triple at any time. And earlier this year, of course, we saw in April an inside the park home run to go with a 450-foot home run on the same night. So he's got all the tools. So whenever he can do something and create chaos, which is, I think, part of that, what David Bell said is the chaos creation is really what helps the Reds, because it puts the defense and the pitchers, it makes them shaky, it makes them nervous, it makes them looking around over their shoulders, and that can only help the other hitters.
He is a tone setter. That's really the word that I was trying to come up with a couple of moments ago. He sets the tone for the Reds. He sets the table in many occasions, but nothing. And I think trying to remember who it was on Monday said that there's nothing he does that surprises us anymore. And I think every single Cincinnati player believes that and feels that way when he's on the field.
Yeah, I've heard many players say that. I know India's probably said it. Andrew Abbott. I know Will Benson has said it. Will Benson has kind of used the term a few times that they have a front row seat to something you just don't see very often. But I don't think it does surprise them because they've seen it now for 2 big league seasons, and a lot of these guys all played together in the minors and they saw it. So he's a special talent. Certainly, he's going to have his ups and downs. I think sometimes people get caught up on the roller coaster ride and the strikeouts and the mistakes, the errors. But when of course, the excuse card will be he's only 22 years old, which is still valid. He's making mistakes here and there, whether it's running back on a ball that the center fielder should run in on and catch. There's all sorts of things you could pick apart about his game, but where it's at right now is pretty good, and it's only going to get better from here if he keeps it up.
So the way I read that, Mark, is that David Bell, more often than not, has to put the brakes on Elly. And he wants Elly to be aggressive. And sometimes the mistakes that Elly de la Cruz commits is because of errors of commission. He tries too hard to make something happen. And I'd rather have that and dial it back. It's the old expression in sports. I'd rather have a player go, and you have to dial him back than to try and force him to get into the game or bring energy that he's not exhibiting. And that's the way I read Elly.
Yeah, I would be shocked if the day ever comes that he's loafing on the field or ever, jaking a play or
right.
doing anything like that. I just don't see ever that happening from him. So, yes, there is some things they have to dial back. I think especially on how he plays defense. I think most of his mistakes are mental errors as far as that, not as much physical errors. And it's part and parcel with being 22 and having a very, very quick minor league development. He moved up pretty quickly once he got into the affiliated baseball, away from the rookie league stuff. And now you're seeing it. So they can live with it as long as other players step up and pick him up. And that's been, of course, another issue is he may be the tone setter, but sometimes there's because of injuries or because of struggles or because of other young players. Not everyone's always carrying the baton once he passes it to him.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because forget the age, okay? Forget the fact that he's 22. It's the development time. And while I think a lot of players can come up right away and be productive, there is an understanding from the major league personnel, whether it's the manager, coaches, teammates for that matter, that they're going to make mistakes. And people have to remember just how quick he was accelerated, like you said so well. He was accelerated through the Reds organization, and I think for good reason. I think the Reds wanted his influence up with the major league club as soon as possible and let him develop there. And I think it's turned out to be a very good decision. Let's move on to the other all-star, Hunter Greene. Speaking of players who didn't really have an extended process or tracking through the minor league system, Hunter Greene came up, of course, in 2022. He went 5-13, 4.44 ERA. Last year, 4-7, 482, and 22 starts. This year, with the development of the curveball, he's been using off speed, filtering that into his mix a little bit more. He's 5-4 with a 3.45 ERA in 18 starts. Yes, he has 116 strikeouts, Mark, and that's tied for 11th in Major League Baseball. The number that stands out to me in those 18 starts, his whip, 1.14. For a starting pitcher, that's outstanding. And as a result, He replaces Tyler Glasnow on the National League All-Star roster. Your thoughts on Hunter Greene making his first All-Star appearance?
Yeah, he's had a nice year. It's kind of been almost under the radar. I think a lot of the starting pitchers, when you look at between him and Lodolo and Andrew Abbott, it's just been a very strong year for the rotation. And you could have made a case for either the other two lefties, like I said. But in Greene's case, you look at a guy who had 2 injury-filled, interrupted seasons, certainly was not reaching his potential. I saw a guy who seemed like he can only get to the 5th inning with 100 pitches, and he didn't have an effective secondary pitch. He was kind of living on his fastball, and he's finding out at the time that those hitters understood how to wallop those balls and send them a long way, and he gave up a lot of homers. And I think now he's found an extra pitch that he's comfortable with. He's kind of ditched the changeup for the most part. He's got a slider. He's got a split-fingered fastball he's been using. I believe it's a split. Oh, yeah, it's a split. And and of course his fastball, and he's becoming more efficient. He's going to the 6th and 7th inning a lot more. And as he said, he took a long, hard look at himself in the offseason and decided he needed to make some changes. And I think he deserves credit for not being comfortable. He already had the contract. He signed a $53 million contract last year. And he might have been able to say, well, I'm good enough and eventually I'll figure it out. But now he decided to kind of do a little workshopping, and he figured it out that way. And I think he deserves credit for that.
I really do. And, I think I said curveball. I did mean splitter. It is the splitter that I think he is really tried to refine. And, we mentioned it with Fernando Cruz. And Fernando Cruz said the one thing about the split finger fastball that people take for granted is how hard it is to develop the command of that pitch. People think you go on the mound, you spread your index finger and your middle finger, and you just start throwing it, and it drops off the table. It's not that easy. Even for a guy like Hunter Greene, who has all of the talent in the world, has a command, has 100-mile-an-hour fastball, has the slider that he had, at a very young age. But to come up with that third pitch, it's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not. I mean, I was talking to a pitcher in the clubhouse yesterday who said when he was a kid and growing up through the system and going to college, he had a horrible changeup, and he's only figured out the changeup in the last 3 years. And for a major league pitcher to say that is interesting, just because, yes, it is hard, especially when you're younger. You get by on maybe your best pitch and maybe one other pitch. But in the major leagues, they're savvy. They research everything. There's obviously scouting and data that tells them what you're going to throw. You become very predictable. And if you don't have a third and fourth pitch to fool guys with, you're going to get burned eventually. And Greene learned that as well. He learned the hard way, like many people do. Sometimes they tell you this stuff, and this goes through life in general. If with kids and everything else. You can tell them, but sometimes they have to live it to understand. And I think he lived it. He understood. He's also taking better care of his body. I think he was prone to some really, the hip injury, the back issue of the last couple of years. And I think he figured out ways to keep himself healthy as well. And that's also something that hasn't been mentioned. He's, as he said, knock on wood, he wants to get through the whole season healthy. And that's also important.
One other thing I've noticed about Hunter Greene, his disposition, his demeanor, when things don't go well, he actually, absolutely pitched his tail off on Saturday, as we mentioned, against Detroit, 7 shutout innings. It's really hard to pitch any better than he did on Saturday. He comes out of the game, and one of the best relievers that the Reds have in Fernando Cruz can't hold on to the lead. After the game, Hunter Greene, even though he might have been disappointed, didn't throw anybody under the bus, didn't even really express any frustration, says those things happen and we've got to be there for each other. Look, I think sometimes we take for granted how young these guys still are and what they have ahead of them. But how a guy like Hunter Greene handles a situation like that tells me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember too, Hunter Greene has been groomed in a way for this since he was a teenager. He was kind of viewed as the next LeBron, I think, back in the Sports Illustrated years. And
Yep.
The baseball LeBron, I should say, or along those
I
lines.
remember the Sports Illustrated cover was
Yeah.
it actually it reminded me, and I don't know if it was the colors, but it reminded me of LeBron in his Akron St. Vincent St. Mary's basketball uniform. It was the same color.
Yeah, and he's been around. He's very media savvy. I think for the most part, he tries really hard not to ever create any kind of controversy when there's a microphone around, and so he
That's very
understands the game.
smart.
And he's highly intelligent too. He's a very intelligent man. But that's just a product of this team, though. They've all been pretty much together. Only on rare occasion have I heard somebody push somebody under the bus or call somebody out. And I think sometimes it needs to happen. I'm not saying that there's no place for it, because I think sometimes people should be accountable for their mistakes. But in that case, Greene certainly has been picked up by the offense when he's done poorly. There's been times when he's blown leads that they gave him, and they didn't push him under the bus for it. And now it's reciprocal.
Okay, that's a terrific segue opportunity here, Mark, for the next topic I want to get to, Graham Ashcraft. He only allowed one run, but he only went 4 2/3 innings on Sunday against Detroit. He took the loss. After the game, he was optioned back to AAA Louisville for the second time in 5 weeks. It's been an up and down campaign. The first time he went down, Mark, as you recall, he admitted he was upset, frustrated, disappointed, whatever, kind of negative tone, connotation, word you want to use. He was that. I want to get your impression on what do you think is missing in Hunter Greene's development this year, his third season in Major League Baseball, because, obviously he came up at the same time that Nick Lodolo and Hunter Greene came up in 2022. But this year, he has not taken the step forward like those two other pitchers have.
Well, with Ashcraft, last year, even though he was the team leader in innings and games and things like that, he had a wildly inconsistent year. He had really good, like a first good 6 starts and about 10 or 12 starts that were lousy. Then to sit on the IL, and then he came back. His last 10 starts were fabulous, and then got cut short by a foot injury. And I think that's still kind of happening this year, where he was capable of some brilliant starts. He's got a triple-digit velocity cutter, but I think some of his other pitches just aren't as effective. And then you throw in, he just seems very susceptible to damage the third time through the order and things like that. And, you look at him and you start wondering, maybe he's a guy that would be even more effective as a closer down the road if he can just throw 2 pitches and really just dial it up for one time through the order. I'm not sure he's there yet, because I'll tell you what, I've seen him at his best, and there was a time I was very bullish on him.
Yep.
That he was going to be the best of the 3, even though I really liked what Lodolo was doing as well. But certainly he's had some health issues that have made me wonder if he's going to be able to hold up. But Ashcraft is a bulldog. He's got the mentality for it. I never feel like he's got any kind of, in his head, anything of that stuff. So I don't fully know why he's not successful or more successful. But right now he got basically, it's plain and simple, he's been overtaken by Carson Spires. And that's really all this is Lodolo had to come back, and Carson Spires hasn't done anything to deserve a demotion to either the minor leagues or the bullpen. And so right now it's up to Ashcraft to take this second demotion and work with it and get better. And with the depth issues they have in general, and you never know what's going to happen around the trade deadline. They may part with somebody. They're going to need him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's back in a bullpen role, and then maybe next year they revisit having him back in the rotation.
Do you think Graham Ashcraft could be a trading chip, or do they want to hold on to him?
Well, they want to hold on to him, I think, but also I think he's a diminished trading chip. If if you are going to move a guy like that, you want to do it while he's at his best value, and especially when he's a young pitcher. And I think if they're going to move anybody, it would be guys with contracts that are expiring, and he's under control. Right. I would not move him under any circumstances.
Let's finish on a positive note. Mark Sheldon of MLB.com covering your hometown Cincinnati Reds. Let's finish talking about Rece Hinds, a terrific story. And look, baseball, the landscape, history is littered with players great stories of players who burst onto the scene, have a remarkable 1-2 weeks, sometimes 1 or 2 months in the major leagues. Then major league pitchers start to figure them out, and they have trouble adjusting back. But Rece Hinds, the first 2 days in his major league career, with everything going on with the Reds outfield, with Stuart Fairchild coming up with a spine injury, fairly minor spine injury, but a spine injury nonetheless. TJ Friedel still on the injured list. He could be coming back momentarily. And then you had Jake Fraley taking a family emergency medical leave over the weekend. Reds were shorthanded. They needed a bat. They go get Rece Hinds. His numbers at AAA Louisville really didn't knock your socks off, right? I mean, at this point, of the season, he was hitting 216, slashing 216, 290, 409. He did have 13 home runs and 41 RBIs. What does he do in his first 2 games? All he does is set a major league record with 5 extra base hits. No major leaguer has ever done that in his first 2 games. And the 2 home runs he's hit, Mark, I don't know if I've seen 2 harder hit balls this season. The 459-foot blast on Tuesday night against Colorado was a thing to behold. Your thoughts on what Rece Hinds has meant to the Reds coming up at this point?
You also mentioned, worth mentioning, he had a 43% strikeout rate at AAA as well.
I did not see that.
Yeah, and it's like, how is he going to be ready for the major leagues? But what's good about it is that he was hot the last 3 or 4 games before he got called up, and I think, as he said, when he gets hot, he can break off a streak like this, and now he's doing it at the big leagues, and certainly pitchers will adjust. And we've seen over the years. We've seen it go both ways. We've seen guys like Jay Bruce come up and have an incredible first week or first month and then kind of level off. And then Jay figured it out and obviously had a very nice major league career. In a way, Elly De La Cruz came up like gangbusters his first month. And then we saw the last 2 months were rough, but then he went back and has come back better this year. And on the other side, we've seen guys like Aristides Aquino, who had a monster home run month in, I believe, 2019. And then he was never heard from again. So we'll see which one Hinds ends up being. I feel like he's got the good makeup, and he's certainly going to be a good hitter, but he's also a big guy. He's got a lot to move, and he's got that big, giant swing. But it's a great story. You love to see it. He's a prospect. He's a top 15 prospect. He was a second-round pick in 2019 behind Nick Lodolo, and he's a guy that a former third baseman that converted to the outfield because they wanted to keep his bat in the lineup and keep him a little less injury, keep him away from injuries a little bit more, keep his legs fresh. And I think it's good, but he's got some development to do. And right now they're going to ride the hot hand, and he's going to have to develop at the big league level, especially if pitchers adjust.
He's only 23. And the thing I love about watching him play right now, first of all, the charisma that he's brought to the clubhouse. It's not all about Elly. We started off the podcast, obviously, talking about Elly De La Cruz and his first all-star nod. But sometimes when a club looks to one guy to bring energy, even for Elly, that gets to be too big of a burden to really shoulder. You have a guy like Rece Hinds come in, and it takes some of the weight off Elly, don't you think?
Well, it takes the weight off of everybody. To have a guy that can hit home runs, that's something they've been missing a little bit this year with Elly. They have, and they certainly had Candelaria for a stretch in June in now India. But they haven't had their big guys that they expected to hit some home runs do that as much. Will Benson's obviously struggled this year. Jake Fraley has 1 home run. TJ Friedel's been injured a lot, and he's not a home run hitter, but he is capable of having some pop, and he's been on the IL 3 times. So their outfield especially has been missing that power guy that can really pick everybody up. And right now Hinds is fitting that bill, and he's the guy that right now, and we'll see what happens after this little stretch and see what he can do. But it's refreshing. They needed a boost right then after the aforementioned Tigers series. They were shorthanded, not just with the outfield, but they have a few guys in that lineup right now that are not getting it done. And he kind of comes in and helps them out. And they will need more guys to do what he's doing in order to have a real shot at helping get this team to the playoffs.
Reds are 44 and 48 as we record this podcast. Do you see a situation where the Reds could be buyers, Nick Kroll and company, or even selective buyers at the trade deadline?
I can see it, but they're going to need to finish this week really strong. They got 2 more games against the Rockies, and then the Marlins are next. If they're still right around 500, I don't see how they could sell off. I mean, they could certainly make selective selling in order to, kind of like they did to a smaller degree with this trade for Austin Slater. They had a lot of depth with left-handed relievers. They moved Alex Young, who was sitting in AAA and pitching well. They needed an outfielder. They went and get Austin Slater. I can see kind of moves like that where they work from their depth to move somebody and bring somebody in. But I don't see the more financial sell-off where they have to start cutting off contracts. But the National League wildcard picture is wide open, and it'd be hard to the team to sell the idea of giving up if they're in the hunt. Now, if they're out of it, if they have a terrible finish to this series, let's say they get swept by the Marlins, then you may want to reevaluate those thoughts. But as it stands now, they're sort of hanging around, and they certainly need to add. They need some help. I mean, Rece Hinds is a great story, but they could probably use a more proven hitter in the outfield to maybe get him over the hump.
He is only 23, but a great story. And it's been great having you on, Mark. Appreciate your time and all of your insights. You can follow Mark Sheldon on MLB.com, covering the Cincinnati Reds on Reds.com. Does a great job, and I look forward to working with you the rest of the homestand as the Reds head into the All-Star break. I hope you get some time to yourself during the break.
Yeah, well, we have the draft, so once we get the draft done, we'll have some time and then get back at it.
All right. He's Mark Sheldon, does a great job covering the Reds for MLB.com. Want to thank him. Also want to thank the producers, our great producers at CLNS Media, for producing this podcast and distributing across all platforms where you download your favorite podcasts. Until next week, I'm Mike Petralia, and this has been the Code Reds podcast on CLNS Media.